necessarily have to take a subject test in statistics. So just for the moment, let me just say a little bit about what happens in mathematics. Of course, the GRE is about a 3-hour exam, and it tests the basics that you should know as an undergraduate, so calculus, algebra, and discrete mathematics. My understanding is that the exam is offered 3 times a year, and that is kind of fixed regardless of what part of the country you're in. September 16th, October 28th, and April 14th. And I believe that these dates are correct since I just checked them a few days ago. If you don't believe me, you can certainly go to this website here through the ETS, the Educational Testing Service, and it can give you a lot more information about, say, how to register for the exam, how much it costs to take the exam, and even say where you can actually go to take this exam. So that's the general idea for the GRE. I don't really want to focus so much on different questions such as what is a good score for the GRE? If you don't take the GRE, will that hurt your chances for getting into grad school? We will have a panel tomorrow morning that's going to focus on applying to graduate school. And so I'd ask that you actually wait on those questions until tomorrow morning to hopefully get more of a comprehensive answer. But it's just saying that if you're applying to graduate school, say in mathematics in the PhD program, you should probably at least think about taking the GRE. There's 4 other parts of your application that you will have to think about. One of them is either a resume or a CV, a curriculum vitae. And again, I'm not really going to focus on exactly what that means, just saying that you should at least think about having either a resume or a CV if you don't have one already. The 2 that I do want to focus on today are a personal statement, whatever that means, and then letters of recommendation. That is what should go into those. And then, of course, you can't get anywhere in this world without worrying about money. So at some point, you are going to have to worry about paying some type of an application fee. There are fee waivers, but if you're wondering about that, again, I'd ask for you to wait until the panel tomorrow morning to ask those questions. At Purdue, I've actually sat on the graduate admissions committee for about 5 years or so. And there's a few things that you learn about being on the committee. This is in terms of reading the applications, learning what's a successful application, what's one that makes you just want to throw it out the window because it's so annoying. But one thing you learn about is that students themselves who are applying to graduate school actually like to gossip amongst themselves about what's really happening. Let's say you may have a question such as, well, has Purdue already started to admit students? Have they started to kind of send out letters? Have they already started to reject people? Should I expect, if it's already March and I haven't heard anything, that perhaps I'm not going to get in? Well, again, these are questions that students ask themselves that they don't necessarily feel comfortable asking the graduate chairs. And what we've learned over the years is that there's a website called the Grad Cafe. It's almost like a gossip site when it comes to applying to graduate schools. But more than that, so if there's any questions that you have on the actual act of applying, whether it could even be as simple as, say, has Purdue started to give out fellowship money more to this other person than this other person? What kind of things should I expect when my letters come back? These are things you can post here on this gradcafe.com. I will say, ironically, the way that we found out about this at Purdue was we started to hear grumblings of students asking questions, but then students were finding out answers without getting them from us. And so someone found this website by accident, and we realized that we could kind of spy on the website a little bit by kind of signing up and then looking like a student, and then seeing what kind of answers people were starting to post. And this allowed us to really get a much better idea in terms of the minds of students that are applying to grad school. So again, if you wanted to kind of answer some questions or be like us and figure out what are people gossiping about, then I certainly would recommend this website here. Now, there are different ways in which you can consider money for grad school once you get admitted. So what I want to focus on is the idea of applying for money, the different fellowships you could apply for, and what goes into those fellowship applications. Perhaps the most famous fellowship application is from the National Science Foundation. So it likes to, well, from what I understand, NSF loves to use acronyms, and 2 of the acronyms are, of course, NSF, National Science Foundation, and the other one is GRFP. This is the Graduate Research Fellowship Program. So I want to focus a little bit on what is the GRE, the GRFP, and then what does it take to apply for this fellowship. Well, the GRFP is one in which you can apply not just in mathematics, but it turns out is over all of the STEM fields. Now, I was fortunate enough to sit in on a few panels that reviews applications for the GRFP. So this is why I'd like to tell you kind of what happens behind the scenes and how everything works here. It's a huge machine when it comes to sort of the NSF GRFP. There certainly are applications that you'll see coming in mathematics and statistics, but then you'll also see them in engineering, you'll see them in physics and chemistry, and you'll even see them in some of the social sciences such as psychology. So you see them all over the place. If I had to make a guess, I would say that there probably are on the order of maybe 10,000 applications coming in overall over all of the different areas. But of course, we're just going to focus on the mathematical sciences, and they're probably on the order of maybe 800 applications or so that come in for the GRFP. Now, the fellowship stipend, from what I understand, is about $34,000 a year. And just to give you some comparisons, at Purdue, if you get a fellowship where you're a TA, we'll offer about $20,000. Whereas if you don't get this nice fellowship and are just offered, so like a standard TA-ship, there you get around $15,000, $17,000. So $34,000 is a significant amount if you're a graduate student looking to get your PhD. The application deadline for physics, math, and astronomy is always about the same time every year. So this year it'll be Friday, October 27th, which means that you almost have exactly a month from today. Just to give you a caveat, NSF is very picky about deadlines. So when they say 5 p.m. Eastern Time, Friday, October 27th, that means if it's 5:01 p.m., they will not accept your application. The system essentially shuts down and there's no way that things can be submitted. So I definitely recommend keeping track of this deadline and really strongly consider submitting your application as early as humanly possible. Luckily, the letters of recommendation don't have to be submitted along with your application. They actually have a deadline that's a few days later. So this year it's Thursday, November 2nd. So you actually do have a few extra days to find someone to write that letter for you. If you want to learn more about the actual fellowship, then there's a link here at the bottom. But again, I want to try to actually go through some of this in some detail today. So let me quickly say, without getting into what's part of the proposal, just what does it mean to submit the proposal? Since it can be a little bit intimidating if you haven't done this before. So before you do anything, you really have to check whether you are actually eligible to apply for the NSF fellowship. And I'll just quickly go over this for the sake of time. Really, there's three main areas you have to worry about. One is, of course, you do have to be a U.S. citizen or have permanent resident status. Number two, you have to be a little bit careful as to how many units you've taken as a graduate student that will allow you to apply, of course, if you're a graduating senior, if you're also a first-year grad student, and sort of if you're a second-year grad student. It depends on quite a bit on the number of units you've already taken. So you have to kind of go to the NSF website to take a look here because it's going to be a little bit complicated the way it goes. And the third thing that you have to be careful of to be eligible is whether or not you've already applied before. Now, this is kind of a new thing the NSF just started maybe 2 years ago. If you're a graduating senior, there's nothing to worry about. This won't be an issue. But if you're a graduate student, it used to be you could apply in both your first year of grad school and your second year of grad school. Now they've changed it so that you can only do one or the other. You can only apply once while you're a graduate student. So simply put, if you're an undergraduate who's graduating this year, feel free to apply. If you're unlucky and aren't able and don't actually receive the money, you can apply again while you're a graduate student, but you have to ask yourself whether you want to apply during your first year or during your second year. Again, you cannot do both, you can only do one or the other. So these are kind of some of the eligibility requirements, but again, you should probably go to the NSF website to make sure that you understand all of the fine details. To submit everything through NSF, you actually have to go to this site called Fastlane, and it's a little bit intimidating if you've never done it before. I'd recommend just going to Fastlane at least once just to kind of see what's there. It's not too bad once you play around with it, but if you haven't done it before, it can look a little bit scary. In order to submit your application, you will have to register as a user. It's not just as simple as, say, you just kind of like find a upload button and submit it. It doesn't really work that way. You will have to go into the system, register first name, last name, what have you, email address, find a username, and then once you have all of that information, then you can kind of upload everything into the system. So that's what I want to talk about next, kind of what do you really need to upload. There are a few hoops that you have to jump through. Of course, when you register, you are going to have to type in a little bit of personal information, so things like first name, last name, email address. You will have to upload some aspects of your resume, so that is your education experience, what classes you've taken. your work experience, what kind of RUs you've done before. You are able to upload your transcripts. I forget whether they have to be official transcripts. I don't think that they have to be, but you will have to find a PDF to upload. I think most schools now do have that. They will ask you to input your proposed fields of study, and I can tell you right now, as one who's sat on the panels before, this is a little bit of a silly thing the NSF asks for because, for example, it's going to ask you what areas do you propose to work in, and perhaps what graduate school do you propose to go to. Well, the application for NSF will be due before you even apply to grad school, let alone even get into grad school. So, of course, you can be very arrogant and say things like, well, I plan to study theoretical physics at MIT, without even planning to submit an application to MIT, let alone even going into physics. But still, it wants to get a rough idea of what areas are you really thinking about. Of course, really to be more practical, they're expecting you to say something intelligent like you plan on going into number theory, because of course number theory, if all of us know, is the best area of mathematics. But the idea is that really you can just, really it's just a matter of kind of asking what you plan on doing, what you're really thinking about. It will ask you to submit the names and email addresses of your letter writers. Again, you don't have to submit the letters with your application, just submit the information, and your letter writers have up until a week afterwards to submit their own letters. But the two things I do want to focus on are, again, the personal statement, and now what's called a research statement. That's what's very different here from, say, what you really see in a grad school application. Before I get on to that, let me pull back the veil a little bit and say, how does the selection process work? How does NSF actually decide who gets the fellowship? So as I mentioned before, there are roughly 800 applications in the mathematical sciences. I'm only saying roughly because a lot of this was kind of from memory the few years that I was on the panels. It could be as many as over 1,000 now. I'm not completely sure, but just to kind of give you an order of magnitude of how all of this works. When the applications come in, they're immediately divided into one of two panels. Roughly speaking, one is theoretical math, one is applied math. So let's say, for example, if you're interested in working in statistics, because let's say that you didn't quite realize that number theory is the best of all fields, then you won't have your application judged with the number theory applications. Those will be in two totally separate panels. So roughly there are about 400 applications, 400, 500 per each of those two panels. Each panel has between 10 and 15 individuals that are reading over those applications. It used to be all of us physically got in one room for about 3 days to read the applications. Nowadays, everything's done virtually online. And the individuals have to read somewhere around 10 applications. Now, as you can probably imagine, you have 10 to 15 individuals reading about 400 applications. They're not going to be experts in all of the different fields of all the different applications. You probably will find at least one person that knows quite a bit about the area that you're writing your application in, but that person still, there are going to be at least 2 other people reading an application that will not be experts. So there's something to kind of keep in mind when we get over to the research aspect of the proposal, that not everyone reading your application is going to be an expert. But you should expect at least 3 individuals to read your application. Of course, it typically is more, maybe about 5 reads or so, but at least 3 individuals will read your application. But again, every individual is reading on the order of about 10 applications or so. Again, the panel meets for a while. It used to be in person for about 3 days. Now I think when it's done virtually, it's over 2 days. Not quite 2 consecutive days, but at least twice in 1 week. And then what they do is they try to separate the applications further into 2 other piles. One is just for the undergraduates, for the graduating seniors, and the other one are for the graduate students. And these are really the first year and second year grad students. There is actually a third type of graduate student that's a little bit complicated to explain. It's kind of the grad students that don't really fit into either the first year or the second year. There's really going to be some extenuating circumstances why I say they might be like a third year grad student, but they didn't quite do it consecutively. So I'm going to kind of skim over that because that's a complicated category that NSF does spend a while to try to explain to its panelists. Now, once these applications are kind of broken up into these various subcategories, of course, they're read, and they're placed into one of 3 groups depending on a numerical score that they get. And I won't get quite into what I mean by the numerical score. I'll say a little bit later. But let me just say roughly that all the applications get dumped into 1 of 3 categories. There's quality group 1, which NSF also likes to use the phrase highly meritorious, which essentially means you got the fellowship, congratulations. roughly about 5 to 10% of the applications that come in get into that category 1, quality group 1, right away. The majority of the applications, I'd say about 75%, get dumped into quality group 3. And pretty much this is the don't let the door hit you on the way out kind of thing. You know, unfortunately, for any number of reasons, the application is not going to get the fellowship. And it could be that, say, the person's disqualified, but they didn't quite realize it when they read through all the different parts of the application. Again, it could be any number of things. But again, roughly 75% of the applications get placed in the quality group 3. The sweet spot, the hardest part for NSF to really deal with is quality group 2. This is the meritorious. I'd say probably another 15 to 20% get placed here in quality group 2. And again, they call this the meritorious type. Essentially, at the very least, you're going to get a honorable mention, but depending on the level of money, you know, I work at a place where it's a large public institution, which means that we have our huge calculus classes. There can be an order of 400 students in a calculus class for a freshman, which means that when it comes to the final exams, it's always something fascinating. Typically, we have to take something like one of the huge auditoriums, that fits about 1,000 people, because of course you have to have at least one seat empty seat in between, so there isn't any cheating. So as you can probably imagine, scheduling the room is a nightmare. Getting all the students in there, for one thing, is a nightmare, and then getting all the students to actually sit down, be quiet, and take the exam is incredibly impossible. And every year, there's a student that pulls the fire alarm. So maybe we should go ahead and try to finish things off. So I'll only go for another 15 minutes or so, and I'll pretty much abbreviate the rest of the presentation here. So we ended off by me saying that there are really these 3 quality groups. Quality group 1, which is about 5% of the applications, will definitely get the fellowship. Quality group 3, which is about 75% of the applications, definitely will not get the fellowship. And then quality group 2, which means at least an honorable mention, but where they draw the line between actually receiving the fellowship and not receiving the fellowship heavily depends upon Congress and how much money they will allocate to NSF every year. So it's really hard to say, of those roughly 15–20% of the applications, how many will actually get the fellowship. It really just varies year to year. What the panels do is they simply break the applications into one of these 3 groups, and then they're asked to more or less rank the applications, let's say from 1 to 20, 1 to 60, depending on the different groups. Quality group 1, it doesn't really matter what the ranking is, because pretty much everyone there is going to get the fellowship. Quality group 3, they don't even bother to rank them, because again, they definitely will not get the fellowship. Quality group 2 is where the arguing happens. If it's a 2-day panel, roughly the first day, it's very easy to place everyone in quality group 1, everyone in quality group 3. But then it's the second or third day, which is where you have a lot of the deliberations in terms of who gets ranked kind of above this person, who gets ranked below. And of course, really at the end of the day, it's totally up to the program officer, because they have to make the decision depending on how much money they have in terms of who gets the fellowship and who doesn't. So with all this being said, in terms of, say, going into FastLane, submitting your application, then knowing that you have these different things to worry about in terms of how your application is being read, what do you have to do next to actually apply? So let me spend the last 10 minutes or so going over the specific nitty-gritties of the application. Now, I mentioned before that there are more or less 2 things you have to worry about. There's the actual personal statement, which has to be no more than 3 pages, and I'll say a little bit about this. And then there's the research statement, which should be about 2 pages. There are the 3 letters of recommendation, but remember that those aren't quite due at the same time as your application. They're always going to be due about a week or so later. Now, for the personal statement, this is somewhat similar to what you would see for, let's say, a graduate school, a PhD application. You want to try your best to answer certain questions such as follows. Why are you fascinated by this research area? What personal and individual strengths do you have that make you a qualified candidate? How will receiving the fellowship contribute to your career goals? I will say that the panel certainly would like to know, because of course they want to give this money to the best and brightest, to really the folks that are going to be the future when it comes to doing research in the mathematical sciences. They really want to know, what are your career goals? Say, do you want to become a college professor? In fact, that's almost one of the criteria of really what they're looking for this fellowship. They really like to know, do you plan on having a career in academia? So really that's one thing that they really do look for in the application. But more generally, they really want to know, have you thought out where you're going to be, say, 5 years from now? NSF is also really big on making sure that you touch on these two phrases. One is intellectual merit, and the other one is broader impacts. I'm going to come back and say a little bit more about this later, but it's saying that within your personal statement, you definitely want to have a running commentary that discusses your intellectual merit with regard to, say, whatever your career goals are, and then the broader impacts, again, to say whatever your career goals are. The research statement, on the other hand, really discusses, say, something that you plan to write for your dissertation. It's a little bit tricky to figure out how you're going to do this, granted if you're a graduating senior, but still it's a good exercise to maybe start to think, what is a research project that you might want to work on? You might even want to start to think, what did you do for your RU? You know, that's certainly a good place to start if you're going to come up with a research problem. If you're a first or second year grad student, you want to think more about what faculty member are you going to work with, and possibly go talk to that faculty member about a specific problem that you might want to work on. The main question that I typically tell my undergraduates to think of when they're going to apply for an NSF is, why are you the best suited to solve this problem? For example, it makes no sense to just find a problem on the internet, say that you're going to solve this problem, put that as part of your NSF. Especially if you've never thought about this problem before, you've never worked on it, let's say it's part of an RU, and there's no faculty at the place where you plan on working for your PhD to even work on that problem. But say, for example, if you're going to go to a place where your potential advisor is the leader in the field in that area, do you put in your application, well, I'm the best suited to solve this problem because the leader in the field is not going to be my dissertation advisor. You know, again, it's something you really want to think about that'll set you apart from other people also submitting their applications. Also, in discussing your research, you do want to focus on these two questions of, again, intellectual merit and broader impact. So of course it goes without saying that when you're going to write up a research problem, you want to discuss the intellectual merit of this problem. And again, I'll say a little bit more about that before I end. You also want to discuss why you're working on this problem. Say that could involve the broader impacts, the implications of this, or it could involve, while you plan on working on this problem as a graduate student, what are some broader impacts you plan to make on the mathematical community as a whole? And again, I want to come back and say more about these two. Now, intellectual merit is more or less what you expect it to mean. You know, why would anyone even care about this specific problem? Here's where you really have to think about things such as, have other people worked on this? Is this currently an active area of research? Is this even something where, say, perhaps Fields Medal winners are working on? Is it part of the Millennium Prize problems from the Clay Math Institute? You know, if you don't know what any of these mean, of course, you still want to ask your professors. This is for the students here in the room. But still, you want to discuss what is the intellectual merit of actually working on this problem? Why is this problem considered to be important to other mathematicians? What's a little bit less easy to define is the concept of broader impact. And I think the NSF purposely leaves this phrase very vague. There are a few different things in which you can list as part of broader impact, but they don't have to be the simple idea of, well, here are applications for this mathematical problem. That's really not what NSF considers to be as part of broader impact. When I'm working with my undergraduates on them putting together their applications, one thing I'd like to say to them is, for broader impact, NSF wants to know, are you going to be more than that mathematician that sits alone in your office working on problems by yourself? Now, this could mean that you're planning on writing a book for people to read. It could mean that you're planning on giving a talk for, say, the math club. It could also mean that you're planning on, say, giving a talk in your research at a conference like MATHFest. So really, it's a lot of different ways in which you're actually getting out there, engaging others, really showing off the research, but doing more than just sitting in your office working by yourself. So I've listed here on the slide a few different ideas of what is this idea of broader impact. But again, NSF tries to be very, very vague about this to really let you decide what you consider to be something in broader impact. Now, I've said a lot about NSF, and in particular, say, what are the different aspects of applying. But it turns out that a lot of these can really be translated to other fellowships. So I just want to spend maybe a minute or so and say, after you apply for NSF, there are lots of other fellowships you can also apply for. Several years ago, a lot of what I said here I actually put up on a blog that's being sponsored by the American Mathematical Society. Of course, a lot of the information on this blog now is kind of outdated in terms of the dates and what have you. But still, if you want to see a little bit more of an in-depth discussion, since I don't really have time here, then certainly you can feel free to kind of read what's on the blog. Also, I think during the panel discussion tomorrow on graduate school, there'll be a lot of discussion as to where can you get money for grad school. Now on this slide, I've tried to list all of the different fellowships that I'm aware of that you can possibly consider applying for, especially if you're considering a PhD program in the mathematical sciences. I've listed here in order by the different deadlines. So you can see that, say, the National Science Foundation has a deadline of October 22nd. This is essentially the first one that you'll have to worry about. Really, after you apply for this one, the application for the rest of them is pretty much one and the same. So it's just a matter of just going to the website and just uploading the same types of files, the letter of recommendation, the research plan, the personal statement. Just to point out a few things about some of the fellowships here, I'll just kind of go over just a couple of them. So one is the Ford Foundation Fellowship. I was actually fortunate enough to sit in on a few panels here as well. Ford is a little bit different from NSF in that it's focused specifically on underrepresented minorities. Now, it's a little bit difficult to see this from the website because for legal reasons, they've decided to only use the word diversity on in their documents. They're really a little bit uncomfortable stating anything for minorities because essentially they're worried about being sued. But if you actually sit in on the panel, then you really see that they really focus a lot on trying to give fellowships to underrepresented minorities. Luckily, they give out 3 different types of fellowships. One is the pre-doctoral, which is one just like the NSF where you're starting grad school. The other one is the dissertation fellowship, which they give out in the last year of your graduate school. And the third one is the postdoctoral fellowship, which is actually a 1 year that they have after you've already gotten your PhD. So certainly if you'd like to learn more about these 3, I highly recommend that you go to the Ford Foundation website. But again, it can be a little bit confusing because there are these 3 fellowships, it's not just one. The second one that I want to point out is the National Physical Science Consortium, the NPSC, partly because this is actually the one that I had when I was in grad school, so I was actually very happy to be an NPSC fellow. And again, this is one that really focuses on diversity and in particular, underrepresented minorities. So I do highly recommend that you consider the website here as well. So all of that being said, again, there's really lots of applications, lots of different fellowship opportunities that you have out there. You probably haven't really thought about them too much. A lot of people just talk about the NSF. But really, if you're an underrepresented minority, or if you have students that are underrepresented minorities, I would strongly consider the Ford Foundation as well as the NPSC. But here I'll just leave you with the idea that please remember that the deadlines are fast approaching for the National Science Foundation Fellowships. The main application is going to be due Friday, October 27th, about a month from today. And then the letters of reference will be due about a week or so after that, so Thursday, November 2nd. So with that, I do thank you for your attention, especially after getting somewhat divided with the fire drill here. And I guess we'll take about a 15-minute break. So, thanks.
So just thank you very much, Edray. Let's give Edray another round of applause. So I just wanted to say 2 things. One, so we've arranged for some small beverage breaks. So that should be here with some coffee and some cookies. And then we hadn't actually agreed on that, but I thought that since some folks were going to be traveling in, I'd arranged sort of my staff kind of convinced me that I should have a light lunch for you guys. And so if you haven't had something to eat, we do have something in room 312, and for the rest of you guys, I think the beverages are already here for us. So we'll be back in 15 or so minutes to hear stuff on our